Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started to maximize the time that we have here together. My name is Sarah Thompson. I work at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and I happen to be the chair for the Leadership Education Member Interest Group. I'm really here facilitating for our colleagues. So I'm going to kind of serve as a moderator for the session. As we set the stage, what we'd like to encourage is that you all, there's a moment where we're going to pass out some paper. And so we'd love for you, as the panel is going on, to jot down some questions, and the student volunteer who's with us here in the room will kind of walk through and gather those questions if you have them. So just kind of raise your hand, let her know you have a question, and that will help us to make sure that those questions are being answered and that we can cater to your audience needs and desires and what the things that you want to learn. So this panel and this session is Coaching 2.0, Learning Leadership Through Creative Coaching Models. And so we have a number of panelists before us, and they're going to introduce themselves here in a moment. But what we're looking at in this session is really how leadership coaching is transforming individuals, groups, and organizations, and helping organizations learn and practice leadership throughout the world, so from a global perspective. We have a first group of panelists who will share with us a little bit about their experiences around coaching and their philosophies around coaching and how those practices really make up the next paradigm, so where we are going with coaching methods in the next paradigm in Coaching 2.0. With that, though, just so we have a sense of who is in the room and so we can make sure our comments really cater to those of you who are in the room. How many of you in the room are professional coaches? Can you raise your hands high? How many of you work in higher education and use coaching models in your work in higher education? Wonderful. What about folks who are in the business and corporate world? Great. And then how many of you are in nonprofit or public leadership realms? And some folks are raising hands in multiple things, in multiple areas. We've been in lots of different places here at ILA, so that's wonderful. This really just helps us to understand who's in the audience. Question of curiosity, how many of you are assessing the outcomes of coaching interventions? So once coaching has happened, you're trying to sort through was it successful and how was it successful? Okay. There's a number of folks who are doing that work. Great. So with that, I think the panel, is anything else that would be helpful for you to know? We're trying to move in. No.
Let's have fun.
Let's have fun. All right. So what I'm going to do is ask a couple of questions of the panelists and allow them to answer through their stories. And then we'll open it up to questions at the end for all of you, primarily through the method of you all writing down your questions and then being collected by the volunteers so that we can see if we can combine questions and make sure that this is a useful amount of time. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists now to describe your professional background and experience with coaching models and programs. And then, check out there?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. Describe your professional background and experience with coaching models and programs.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Schwartz. I'm a program manager at the Illinois Leadership Center at the University of Illinois. And I run a co-curricular and curricular comprehensive multi-semester leadership certificate program that integrates coaching directly in with that program with students' leadership education. So within that, we pair students one-on-one with coaches. So we have over 250 volunteer coaches that work with over 500 students in the program, and they help them customize a personal philosophy of leadership, a personal development plan that sets specific goals around skills and attributes of leadership education and how they're actually going to create and sustain leadership change in their lives, and also how they're going to document that. What is the evidence for their learned leadership that they can talk to their peers, their colleagues, their future employers about so they can then go and actually lead change and interact in sustainable ways. So it's a very transformational, very personal process that we're actually using in undergraduate and graduate education at the University of Illinois. One of our many things that we do at the Illinois Leadership Center, in addition to teaching leadership courses, doing one-day co-curricular leadership experiences called iPrograms, a leadership institute, many different and diversified skills that we teach. I've also just started the Coaches Training Institute professional coach training and certification program, so I'm fresh in on that. So if anyone has done CTI or if they're an ICF affiliate. I appreciate that in the audience as well. And I'm doing that for my own personal development as an individual and also professionally, how I can integrate that into the program that we're running to both add value to the coach training that we're doing for these volunteer coaches and also add value to the students that I'm personally coaching.
Hello, my name is Thomas Helwig. I figured out that I'm the one here on the panel to make it a little bit more global, so I'm non-American, as my accent gives away. Born and bred in Germany, I'm a resident in France, and I'm a trained medical doctor with a degree in psychotherapy. Turned a little bit after a few changes in life into more the corporate and the business school world, so I'm currently a program director at the INSEAD Business School, who is basically in France and in Singapore, with now a third campus in Abu Dhabi. And, well, on the coaching model, I think what we at INSEAD, especially at the Global Leadership Center, pursue is a group coaching, an executive group coaching approach. Yes, we do some individual coaching as well, and also in the private work outside the business school, but at INSEAD in executive education programs, we pretty much use the executive groups coming on campus to, in a, what we call, Professor Katz-DeVries developed a clinical approach. Now, perhaps just two or three words to the clinical approach. It's a mixture of things. It's of psychodynamic base, but it has got elements of other approaches as well, like for instance Gestalt, and also I would say, well, pretty much using life stories, narratives, and also pictures to go a little bit beyond just the facade. So that's one model I've come across and we practice. I'm also an associate with CCL, so the Center for Creative Leadership in Europe, and as such I also experience sort of more the cognitive approach to coaching and more the individual coaching. So that's basically the two approaches. I think programs, that's enough. You can probe me on other things, but otherwise.
I'm Bill Millard. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Life Calling and Leadership at Indiana Wesleyan University. I'm also a Professor of Leadership Studies there and the Chair of Leadership Studies at the university. My background comes from leadership in the public, corporate, nonprofit, and educational fields. So I've had leadership experience in quite a few areas and was brought to the university there 12 years ago to build the Center for Life Calling and Leadership. I'm a theorist and a model developer, so that's kind of how we built the center there. So we've developed several models that help us in dealing with our students, and then I use also when I continue to do coaching with leaders outside of the university. We use one approach that we call a life calling approach, where we look at people get a sense that, and I think leaders need to have a sense of calling so that they come in with a little bit higher noble aspiration than to just be in power. So we look at the whole concept of values, then leading in out of our model into the uniqueness, and we go with it very much. All of our coaches in the center come from a positive psychology background, so we look at strengths-based, and then looking at passions and experiences and that uniqueness, and then we take that in the model into a sense of developing that into a personal mission, into sort of a strategic future of where you're going to take this. So we look at very much a model, but we like to think of our models very much as being organic as well as systematic, so that there's flexibility, but yet with the model they help make sure that we're covering the key essential areas. We do our coaching one-on-one and with small groups, and then we also have developed classes that go along with that, which I would say is sort of like coaching to 25. And all those are going to take a different type of coaching, but they allow us to have breadth of coverage as well as depth of coverage. And we use models to guide us in all of those areas.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me in the back? Sorry about that. I'm Ann Dinan, and I'm with the Personal Leadership Institute. didn't sound like this yesterday, and hopefully not tomorrow. I started out as an intercultural trainer late 1970s, and thought that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And lo and behold, lived and worked overseas, came back, decided maybe I get more into human resources, and got tapped on the shoulder to perhaps do some OD, organizational behavior work. Then I looked into social work, got a PhD in social science research, went into academia, and said, oh, what these students really need is something called coaching. Turned everything back and went and got a certification in coaching from the same organization that Leslie did, Coaches Training Institute, and started a coaching program for students at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. Within 3 months, we had waiting lists. We didn't even advertise the program. Students were clamoring for coaching. It was just phenomenal. And then I took a step back from that and said, now what are we really doing? I thought, this is really personal leadership work. So I started investigating and researching leadership and brought the two of them together into the Personal Leadership Institute. Currently coach and consult individually, in groups, globally, domestically, Fortune 500 companies. I still do one-on-one coaching. I still work with students, and I work with executives as well. So you just never know what path you're going to take for the leadership coaching. I'm really kind of curious to hear some of your stories as well. Thank you.
Okay, the next question. The Coaching 2.0 paradigm is one where all invested stakeholders play an integral role in leading change in a coaching relationship. Please share creative or innovative coaching strategies that you've helped to develop and or implement that demonstrate this emerging pattern.
Well, actually, piggybacking off something Ann just mentioned, within the Leadership Certificate program that I coordinate, one of the fundamental things that students consistently say is the favorite part about it is the personal relationship they build with the coach. They are hungry for self-awareness, for self-discovery, for just the opportunity for someone to build that caring, compassionate relationship with them and ask them the questions that they don't even know how to ask themselves. So when I look at coaching as a field, as an opportunity, I view it as just a process for asking those provocative questions, for kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. I'm personally informed by the work of Sharon Dulles-Parks, The Big Questions, Worthy Dreams, creating capacity for students to even hold on to a big enough question to inspire worthy dreams within their hearts and in their minds. And just this morning, when we were hearing the keynote by Karen, one thing that stuck out to me was compassion, and I wrote it down. I have to bring this to the panel. I wrote, coaching creates the capacity for compassionate curiosity. So the ideology that the compassion and the curiosity drive the questions. It's not about finding the right answers, the best answers. It's about instilling the discovery process and unleashing that within the students. So not pouring knowledge in, but inspiring this upsurging of creativity and innovation and transformation within students' lives. Parker Palmer also talks about this ideology of purpose and calling that Bill referenced, and just focusing on how do you inspire your best self and bring that forward. So when I work with my students, that's what I aim to do. So from those who work from a student development perspective or a client development perspective, I'm sure that can relate as well.
Would you repeat that quote?
Sure. The Leslie original now. So coaching creates the capacity for compassionate curiosity. Lots of speed. You're welcome.
We can follow the same order. So, in the question there's a lot of things in there. So, yes, we're talking about the coaching of tomorrow, about innovation, integration. Now, on things what I do and what some of you seems to do as well, like to do that in the context of somehow higher education, or in my context at a business school. Now, I think integration is one thing that really comes to my mind, and like how to relate that, because people come to courses. Yes, they most of them they volunteer, but they didn't volunteer necessarily for the coaching part of it. So it's not like you've got clients all lined up and they chose you as a coach and they wanted to work with you because they liked your face or whatever your background or your accent. But as a matter of fact, in programs in higher education, I wouldn't say higher education, in business schools, for instance, you sometimes have a very mixed bag of people just showing up there, and they didn't ask for coaching, and then you sort of bless them with some sort of coaching. Now that's quite a difficult task, I found. So from our experience, we found this sort of group coaching approach helps, because it's not only the sort of trained coach is there. There are people in the same situation. And it's almost like, if I use an example from the medical world, the work of balance, so balance groups, like people giving themselves advices. Advice giving they're quite used to, so you don't name that initially coaching to them. But I mean, I sometimes also like to lower the barrier of what is coaching. It's everything and nothing. Sometimes you're allowed to give advice in these sort of group sessions. Yes, as a qualified coach, you then try to, by facilitating these groups, to turn that around, of not just saying, well, we give you an advice, but to somehow manage the process correctly to turn it into a coaching session. So that's, in terms of innovative structures, I found one thing. Another thing I want to mention here as well is, very often, for instance, when you work with companies or clients coming on board, not in open enrollment programs, but in company-specific programs, or when you work with a client on their side, then for me, one key question is always like, how do you take the temperature of the organizational culture? Because it's not only like there's one individual and how can I cater for that person or so. It's also like in what sort of context in terms of his team, his organization he or she is in. And we developed a new tool for that. It's called the Organizational Cultural Audit. And that gives, it's a sort of a 360, because you can use it in terms of asking a group. It works from 20 people onwards, like to question them beforehand, before the workshop, for instance, like a set of questions. And some of it is just like forced ranking of certain values. It's about values and reality. Where are our values and where's the reality? And then open questions, what are the barriers, what could we do with that? So that one, to pair that in workshops, to take the temperature, and then again here to bring them in and let them discuss. So you're not prescriptive then in the way you bring teams and then larger groups in, but you can, well, this is what you filled in. So this is where the gap between value of your organization and your reality is. What do you do with it? And that's these two things, so group coaching approach and taking organizational culture, the temperature of organizational culture, I found very powerful and innovative strategies.
I'll add a couple of things that we look at that feel are very important in this whole process. First of all, coaching should be the facilitation of a discovery process. It's not a process where we're telling people what to do, but helping them go through the discovery process. But in that discovery process, especially when we're talking about leadership and leadership that is needed right now across all countries in the world, is we need to have coaching that's looking at some things differently. This is what we try to do. Rather than just looking in the mirror, we want people to start looking in their spirits, because there needs to be some value brought back into that whole process, values that are driving the kind of leadership that's being offered in the different venues. Secondly, in the discovering of our uniqueness, we want to take the paradigm of looking at our unique strengths and assets in the context of stewardship. How do we then best use this rather than just what do we possess? And then finally, when we're looking at mission, we're looking at that in the context of how do we take that into service in others. It's really interesting, especially when we look at government. In our government in the United States, we call it public service, public servants. And I don't think there's a whole lot of service being talked about there much anymore, but we want to look at that as public service. I mean, it's service to others, whether it's in the public sector or private sector or educational sector, rather than just self-fulfillment. So I think when we coach and we can look at that discovery, we can guide the kind of discovery that goes on. That's what we tried to do with the model that we used, is to take this focus of trying to help them discover leadership in a more noble fashion.
In our work, we're primarily trying to really help people understand their own self-leadership. And by the end of the process, we then want to have them be able to turn that outward in terms of what can I then give back to society, how can I better society, whether it's my family, whether it's my roommates, whether it is my organization, my team, my neighborhood, what have you. So that is our ultimate mission there. The way we do it is if we're working with an organization as opposed to an individual, to save resources, we try and develop training modules, and then we infuse individual and coaching programs as we're going through those training modules. Some of the things that we do initially is we also do assessments. We'll do 360s for individuals if that's necessary, and or a culture survey, and we use the leadership circle profile, which actually just is a beautiful way to dovetail with the coactive coaching model that we use. Some of the dimensions of the program for the training are exploring dimensions of leadership. So we want to look at what is a leader. I mean, we'll start with the very basics of what are some of the characteristics of leadership in general, and then we move it into what are the dimensions of your own personal leadership. We'll pull in some leadership and self-perception components from the Arbinger Institute. We'll go into a relational leadership component where we're looking at your personality typing. Sometimes we use True Colors, sometimes we use something like the MBTI, depending on our audience. We'll look at the EQI. We'll also do another component on influencing without authority, so people can have a better understanding of their own impact. And then we go into an ORSC model, which is Organizational Relationship and Systems Coaching. So we are using a systemic theory there, a systems theory approach. Just an example, one of the pieces we use there is John Gottman's work, which some of you may be familiar with from the marriage and family therapy arena. Sometimes our participants freak out a little bit when we give them the book on why marriages succeed or fail when we're sitting there talking about coaching. But we use his 4 horsemen, which is basically what is your default mode you go to in terms of conflict. Because if you're doing it at home, you're probably doing it in the workplace. And it's a way for them to understand what their own horseman is, for example, and identify that with others. Our next area is we look at intercultural pieces, and then we look at what is going to be their plan, their action plan for giving back. And again, we just infuse individual and group coaching throughout that training. And if we're just working with individuals, all of those components of the model can be done individually as well.
Sarah, I have one more thing to add. As I'm hearing all these great models, one that I forgot to mention that jumps to mind now is the strengths-based leadership model. And Bill mentioned this earlier as well. We pull a lot from the work that the Gallup organization and many other organizations have done on developing natural talents into strengths. So within the Leadership Center work and the certificate and just my work in general, always focusing on that positive psychology approach again. How do you assess what your natural talents are? What are the skills, the abilities you will need to develop those into true and lasting strengths? And what are you going to do once they are your strengths to sustain that?
Just a reminder to be jotting down questions and pass them kind of to the center aisle, and we'll pick them up and form our final kind of closing remarks around your all's questions. There might be one or two or three. The panelists are going to answer the following questions. What's the biggest opportunity or challenge that exists in the Coaching 2.0 paradigm?
Yeah, reverse the order.
I feel like the biggest challenge here is to get people to think from the individual piece to the more collective piece. And I know that almost sounds a little antithetical to one-on-one coaching, but I don't know if any of you are familiar with the concept of Ubuntu. It's an African concept. We're going to be presenting on that tomorrow, so I won't go into it, but it's really for those of you who don't know, it's who I am in relation to who we all are together. And I personally feel like that's the biggest opportunity and challenge, and what that might be, what's on the horizon, is how do we get out of just looking at this from an individual perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest challenge, because so many times in coaching when we're dealing with individuals, it's very easy to get into what I call navel gazing, and you become very narcissistic in the whole approach. And so that's really the challenge, is always to keep people not just becoming fascinated with themselves and what they have to offer in leadership or whatever aspect you're looking at, but to see that really true leadership development occurs in the larger context. I like what Dr. King said, that I can never become what I am meant to be until you become what you are meant to be, and you can't become what you're meant to be until I become what I am meant to be. That's the nature of reality. And I think that's really true, that unless we're discovering these things in the larger context of the greater community and society, then we haven't fulfilled our task. And so I think that's always the challenge of this kind of coaching.
Yeah, I just wanted to, where I see really a challenge. We asked you early on, or Sarah asked you the question, who is here coach? Everybody could have raised the hand, because, I mean, this is not a protected profession. So I think the biggest challenge in these years is, how do we become as a profession more professionalized? And for me, that's, at the moment people sort of seem to screen like by proxies, like show me which professional body you have signed up for, but that's only like, where did you pay your membership? Show me which program, coaching training program you've done. So this is not really, I think, to get it more and more professionalized, and to also be really interested in how do you assess outcome of your interventions. Just perhaps for some of you, I've seen a recent article by, Catherine ILA and others in Leadership Quarterly this year, early on this year, and it was all on coaching evaluation, and it's quite interesting. It was a review article on certain things, but from my practice, I always see like a lot of people, we just take the happy smiley sheet at the end of the session, and that's satisfaction. That's not really evaluating what we've done. And of course, I have to say, it's a fearful thing as a coach and as a trainer, to assess really what you're doing and what sort of outcome 1 month down the line, 3 months down the line. We've done one study at INSEAD looking like 1 year down the line, to do another 360 assessment of the same sort we did beforehand, and also to do interviews. And it is sometimes surprising, some of the things that positively have changed, but then also like to just like one thing up, like for instance we had one dimension, resilience to stress, and that sort of showed, less resilience to stress 1 year down the line. There are lots of interpretation why that could be, and some of them are very positive also, yes, but I think for me the key question is, how do we become as the whole more professional in our profession as coaches? And that's the really 2.0 for me approach. Like that's on assessment of yourself, of your programs, and not just happy smiley sheets.
All right, I want to move us on. We have lots of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Can you share a little bit about what's on the horizon for leadership coaching? Can you move into that? What do you think is on the horizon for leadership coaching?
This actually dovetails really well into the opportunity I was going to throw out there. We talked about some of the challenges, but the opportunities that are on the horizon are making coaching making people literate about what coaching is. So coaching is a new emergent field even now. It's been going on for the past few decades, but it's really picking up. And just the number of people in this room are proof to that. So making coaching accessible for individuals. One of the things that I constantly think about and sort of grapple with is, you shouldn't just go to a coach because you're in the time of crisis or transition. You should be going to a coach to stay healthy and remain future-oriented and grounded and mindful in the present as well. So differentiating between when you need to go to a therapist, when you need to go to a coach, how to utilize those services to become the best version of you and to create that literacy around that, and taking that a step further and focusing on what are some of these global challenges that we're facing. We heard today just about interfaith dialogue and interfaith literacy, and that is a challenge for the 21st century. How are we using coaching and coaching models and coaching relationships to bridge that gap and to help people truly know who they are and how they're impacting change in relationships and communities?
I think it's really key in the future, something the question's going to be asked, and it's kind of interesting because you ask what it means to be a leadership coach. Actually, both words have a very interesting context. You can be either one by just saying you are. So you can say, I'm a leader, or I'm a coach. And I think somewhere along the line, in the coaching, it'd be nice to think that it's having a leadership aspect to it. In the coaching, somewhere along the line, we need to be able to define what that is and to bring, I think that's what Thomas was referring to. There needs to be something a little bit more professional credentialing or whatever needs to be brought into the area.
I'd like to move into potentially some of the panel questions. They dovetail nicely with some of the things we talked about asking you all. So one individual is asking, can everyone hear me okay? I have several years experience, 4 years, doing individual coaching. I want to start integrating into group and peer coaching, but I have no resources. Book series activities. What information can you share to give me some help to start group or peer coaching? And there's also another question around what books should I continue to be reading to develop my coaching skills? So if you could answer the question in terms of both peer and group coaching, what resources exist for peer and group coaching, to clarify that, please. And then in general, what coaching resources exist that you would recommend to our audience today?
I try and answer perhaps not to all of these questions at once, but by the way, if that's not true, to address that person perhaps directly, who asked one of the first question? There we go. Thank you.
I have the same question.
You've got the same question. So a lot of very good. Now I think when we all work with smaller and smaller resources or so, and then we all try to innovative. We try to combine things or so. I think one thing for me I always find very important to partner with other people who do perhaps something along that line. It's not just reading the book in that field and then saying I apply textbook knowledge one-to-one to my executive team or so, if I might say that. I think it's like as coaches we should also a little bit practice what we preach, like do get a coach, so to say, to co-coach you, to co-direct your first program together and not just to make the same silly mistakes like we all do in the beginning. So why not partnering with people who've done that before or who are a little bit further up on the line where you want to go? How to find them? I would say these sort of conferences are sometimes a hub where you can actually tap into the knowledge, where you find interesting themes, where you find, I always jot down a few ideas when I go to these conferences and say like, who can I contact you? And it's almost like, how do you build your network? Books, of course, I can bless you with all sort of book tips, but I think that's not what really is on the cards, because there are enough books around to learn from everything that I would say partner and rather find a network of people who help you to the next stage.
And there is an actual resource out there for very inexpensive, if not free coaching. I know, shocking, isn't it? And I'm going to see if Leslie can help me with this. But the Coaches Training Institute offers a certification program after you do basic training. And when you're going through certification, as the coach, you need to have a minimum of, I think, 5 clients. And a lot of times, people have a hard time finding those 5, quote, paying clients. Well, paying means you can pay $5 a month. So you could benefit as one of their clients pay a minimal amount of money and be getting coached by somebody going through certifications with that basic training. Plus, they then are subject to, I think, 3 different supervisors who listen to the tapes of them coaching you and giving feedback. I believe you can register for this. Does it have a name?
I know that through CTI, if you're in CTI, you can do a coach match program, but if you're not affiliated with the organization, if you just email their general account to say, hey, I heard this great panel on coaching, and I'm interested in getting coached by someone in your certification program. I don't know if there's an official title for it.
There's a listserv, and you don't have to be a graduate of CTI to be on the listserv, and then I think you can just post on the listserv and say, I'm interested in becoming a client. So, but if it's Coaches Training Institute, and it's CTI.
And to address the question on just group and peer coaching a little more, my experience with group coaching has been when the group is focused on a shared vision or a common purpose, so it's not individuals needing coaching on specific issues, but the group is coming together and focusing on how can we be more productive, how can we have better group dynamics. So like kind of co-creating what that vision is and then having them personally define what part am I playing in creating that together. So there's a little bit of individual work and self-work, but it's the group accountability and the partnership in that, so everyone is raised to a higher level. So that's more of the philosophy behind it, but if you want specific strategies, we can talk offline a little after too.
Where would they go to get started to go group and peer coaching? So, that kind of describes it, but how do you even get into, and what are some books that people are asking about books?
I don't know of any group and group coaching in particular, unless Manfred has some.
Yeah. We don't want to take any. Well, Manfred Ketz-de-Vries and then some others have brought out recently a book called The Coaching Kaleidoscope. That gives a little bit of a taste of group coaching we do. And then also perhaps to say, for me, coaching a group and coaching a team, there's a profound difference. And very often I find like when you work with clients, it's not just working with a group. You work with an executive team. You work with a sales team or whatever. And coaching in teams, this year there was a book that came out called, I think it's called Coaching Teams at Work by David Clutterbeck. So he's a professor and in the UK, so in England. And I found the concepts and the frameworks he puts in there also, just to name 2 basically. I think that's
great. Go ahead.
And just a potential website that might be helpful where they would probably list resources such as books. If you just Google ORSC, O-R-S-C, Organizational Relationship and Systems Coaching, I'm pretty sure that they have a fairly extensive resource list there.
Wonderful. So some questions around certification. Is coaching certification important? Why or why not? And where did you get your coaching certification? How would you evaluate the coach certification program? So thoughts around coaching certification.
For me, there's a basic coaching program that I went through that was 5 modules that were 3 days each. And then certification was above and beyond that. And I will tell you, I think it is one of the most valuable things I've ever done in my life. And it was more of a consternation on the day that I was having my coaching certification test than it was the day that I needed to defend my dissertation. It's a very rigorous process. When you come out, you've got all the skills you need as a coach, because a lot of times people feel intimidated when they go through this basic coaching, like, am I going to do more harm than good when I'm working with people? Am I going to have enough of the skills that I need for anything that's going to come my way? I just thought the certification program was fantastic. I personally have a bent here in the U.S. by making sure you choose an ICF accredited program. The only reason I have that bent right now is because, for one, for what we've been discussing in terms of the professionalism of the profession, but there are organizations out there now who hire only ICF certified coaches as consultants or as employees. So if I was going to spend the time and the money to go through a program, I would just make sure it was an ICF stands for International Coaching Federation.
One thing I'll add to that, I just started my training, so I haven't even gotten to the certification point. And it took me 2.5, 3 years to actually make that step. So I was doing coaching kind of ad hoc in different organizations in the program that I run. I was getting so many great skills. And I got to the point where I thought, I want a little more. I'm hungry for that learning. And I'm sure I could go through my entire life without being certified and still do some good coaching, but I don't just want to be a good coach. I want to be a great coach. And I look at the training programs that are out there that have been tested and the coaches that I've talked to that just inspire me to be a better version of myself. And when I went out there, I said, okay, world, what's out there? What can I do to take that next step? And there's numerous programs, like Ann mentioned, through ICF and other agencies. And they do online training. They do phone training. I personally chose CTI because I needed that in-person, being in a community of learners, being in that space. And that was my learning style. So that's why I made that personal decision. But the nice thing is, specifically with that program too, if you start it and you decide, wow, this is so not for me, they will refund your money. So for me, that was a no-brainer. It's like, the worst thing that can happen is I paid for a trip to New York and I learned something. So it's a low risk and sort of that moment of truth where I just said, I'm going to go for this and I'm going to see what happens after that.
I want to add a little bit of a different twist into the whole idea of credentialing in the coaching process. Because while I think that's important, I think it's also so many coaches, we all tend to use psychometric measures in what we do there, and yet so many are out there actually using psychometric measures without really being credentialed in those tools and doing what I call right now in the whole area of malpractice. I think there's as much malpractice being done in coaching with tools as there is true practice. So my feeling is if you're going to use these tools in the process of coaching, then you want to talk about credentialing. You can have something that says you're a certified life coach, but if you are a coach, but if you don't really understand the tools that you're then using, then you can still be somebody malpractice and have a nice certification to do it too. So I think you need to really look at the tools and be careful that you know what you're using.
And I just want to add one other aspect to the whole discussion on certification. I think in my eyes, it's not enough just to have the right sort of certification, but it goes on from then. And for me, the word supervision is quite important. I think it's also a sort of a malpractice I can be MBTI and whatever and 5LB trained and so, but I've done my training whenever, and I still use it. But I mean, for instance, like to review the sort of coaching you're doing and to have somebody independent, and here I would say like even to pay. It's not just asking your best friend who works in the same place. That's almost like, well, it's a neighbor. It looks back on the same practice. Choose somebody independent. Pay that person and be in a professional contract with him or her. I think that's really what adds then, and what sets you perhaps aside just from being good. It's from good to great. I think the great coaches I've come across, where I look up to them, they carry on with supervision.
Moving on to the next question, combining a couple of questions. First, can you describe what is the difference between coaching and facilitation? And then second, isn't coaching a new name for what teachers, trainers, and parents should be? We'll start with the coaching and facilitation first, then we'll shift into a shift in paradigm, essentially around teaching teachers, trainers, and parents. So what is the difference between coaching and facilitation?
Great question.
Any takers?
I'm thinking about how to articulate that.
Now,
Yeah,
I think, well, since nobody is really volunteering here, I think a straight answer would be no, that doesn't have to be any difference.
Yeah.
I can ask further question at the same time. What's the difference between coaching and therapy? Sometimes it can be the same. Sometimes it's a helping relationship. Sometimes you can be a coach and a facilitator. It can be pretty much different. Well, Bill basically you said it would be great if the profession as a whole come to a definition what coaching is, where does it stop and where does it begin. But to some degree, I sometimes feel like, why? Why is it so important to really define our little space where we are? If that works, whatever label I stick on that, but if that adds value to it, and if my client works with me rather together because I call myself consultant or facilitator rather than coach, because that is culturally, in whatever cultural context you work, more acceptable, great, and do it. I would almost like advocate against to define that or to spend so much time on where that's one stop and almost like it's to the second question as well. Yes, to some degree, sometimes you pick up, even like coaching executives, you sometimes feel like, gosh, you come to really deep lying conflicts. You could have said, but that's because you went through a story when you were a kid and you still live that story on, if I might use the psychodynamic approach also there. Then you might say like, yes, this is what your parents have not done, and you still live that on because, although you're a CEO of a company. Yes, that's true. Does it help him or her if I say, well, Hannah, I make the diagnosis, your mom, your dad, you failed on you? No. Take that on and say how can we work best out of it. And here again, you not come up with a solution to that as a coach, but by helping the other person, and that's for me a real definition. I think you tried one also before, helping the other person to discover whatever it is, and then to encourage that person to look for solution. That's what coaching is. And the facilitator, to some degree, does that as well in a different context. Does it answer your question, or have I just avoided your question smartly?
I think it's interesting, but at the same time, if you know the definition of who you are, then you better serve your role. Mm-hmm.
May I ask you then a question from, because the panel is also allowed to ask questions. How do you define? Because you're a professional, you come with some knowledge to it.
Yeah.
How do you define coaching?
I actually distinguish between teaching and facilitating, because I am professionally I'm a teacher and I'm a professor at this college. And I think today's world is more about facilitating. And that's what you are doing, right? By coaching, you try to help a person to find out about this, that Wednesday said about. You help a person to find out the best of that person. You facilitate their own best qualities. But by teaching, you are more kind of giving ready knowledge. Instead of facilitating, you bring out best qualities of a person. That's the difference how I see it.
But here you define just teaching and facilitation.
Yeah.
You use almost, if I might say.
But you are speaking about coaching 2.0. That's why I'm asking you. Yeah. You are the leaders of this.
One thing to add on that, and I loved how you described the delineation between teaching and facilitation. That was beautiful. And kind of taking it to the next level with coaching, I view coaching and facilitation as leadership skills that tie in together. So I don't think you can easily splice it like Thomas was saying. It's hard. So that's why you kind of stumped us at first. You're like, oh, that's a great question. And that's something that as we move forward, we need to have dialogue around that and really figure out what does that mean. And I think some of it's semantics, and a lot of it is what does that creation process look like, and how do we use those skills so we are both curious and compassionate, as I mentioned, but also so we're credible and maintain the professionalism.
There was another offer for an answer from someone in the audience, and I might just offer you to go ahead and share a little bit. I'm a coach and a facilitator, and facilitate, supervise, engage students in the development and learning, in the learning process, and then I coach CEOs by guiding them towards the solution they are looking for. So another offering of thought. I would suggest we move on to another area. What 360 assessments do you use, and why do you like that specific tool?
I use the leadership circle profile, and I researched quite a number of them. It took me years before I would make the leap, and that's because most places charge you to become certified in their instrument so that you can actually use their instrument. And so I thought, well, I really want to get this right. But honestly, I've never been more impressed with the 360 and then its companion, the culture survey, in terms of how it gets to underlying values, specifically underlying leadership values that affect underlying leadership behaviors. And when I get that 360, when I get those 360 results back, and we do just one, I do more than this, but once we do the first initial sit down with them, I mean, it's just ahas, eye-opening. It's a brilliant piece of work, and I have nothing to do with it. I get nothing from it, but I was very, very impressed with it.
I'd like to make a recommendation if your coaching is going on, especially if you're looking in an area with organizations and leaders, not necessarily students. And that is new tool going into the 360 area developed by my colleague and buddy Jim Lobb, who actually happens to be here. Jim, raise your hand back there. The OLA 360, the Organizational Leadership Assessment. I think they actually have. Don't you have something here? The exhibit room here, because it's a great tool for doing a 360 as far as your leadership goes. Really centered around the whole idea of servant leadership and your attitude and the values that you have in there, and what you come there by. What are you? How do you see yourself authentically developing people, valuing people, building community, providing the kind of leadership necessary, and ensuring leadership? All qualities that are really needed for what I would call leadership 2.0.
Great. Thank you both. So kind of going back to the discussion around professional tenets, what would be the professional tenets of coaching in terms of professionalism? And then what are the most robust evidence-based models for coaching?
I'm going to start backwards with the answer to that, and reference the coactive coaching model, which from my limited, I'll own that I'm still new in this. I'm still growing like all of you are, like all of we are. And from my own research, the coactive model is the one that speaks the most to me for human development and potential. And the premise of that is the individual that you're working with is creative, resourceful, and whole. So you're not working with someone who's broken and damaged, and you're assuming the best out of the person and exploring the potential for them to grow. So I think one of the underlying assumptions and foundational principles of any coaching, specifically this model, is that you're working in a very positive realm. You're inspiring future orientation rather than dredging up the past and trying to solve it all. And that's also a delineation between therapy and coaching in a lot of ways. They're often used together to kind of help and make that relationship coexist, and there are places for both. So coaching is definitely not replacing therapy and vice versa. But when you look at just why would a client or an individual or a student go to a coach, what would be their motivation? Because they realize where they are and they want to be better, and they want to be someone else, like be somewhere else or someone else, and they see the best in themselves they want.
Responses around robust evidence-based models for coaching.
You're the model man.
I was just clarify, and whoever asked that, you could just kind of clarify what you're asking there. Okay.
What I'm talking about is what is the evidence? We oftentimes come up with models,
Right.
schematic drawings,
Exactly.
but what are the underlying theoretical and research that actually supports that model?
So could you repeat the question before you answer it?
Okay, what are the theoretical underpinnings for any model we have, and how do we address whether or not those are valid? And I think two things I know when I'm developing models and I'm looking at specific components, where I always start is I start very much with a rich literature review to look. There's hardly any model out there right now. I mean, I've had models already handed out during our sessions, and we're only on the first day of ILA. But no model is being handed out that is completely original. They were all borrowing from everything else. But that's all right. It's kind of like what Thomas was saying. Who cares if it works, if it helps to a certain extent, like when they're trying to decide whether everybody should come into a certain definition.
And that's where evidence-based
Yeah,
comes in.
exactly. So you look at a couple things. Number one is from the literature review, you start to say, is this basically zeroing in on something that's accepted across the general field, not some sort of bizarre thing requiring asteroids or something like that. But then secondly, the next place to go, that's what we always do, is go into testing with good science. Because I come from a background in science and psychometrics where we go and then we'll test these things in tests where you're going to look at the validity and see what the results are. That's why I think it's so important, the questions that come up, that we need to have accountability brought into all these things. What are the long-term results? Do they actually make a change? What I find in assessment right now is all of us are really good in assessment at measuring output. 45 people came through our coaching session. 100 students took our class. 10 executives were coached. But we're not very good at measuring outcomes. Were their lives changed? And so then you have to go down and develop those kinds of tools, and we do that. In that case, it's very much doing like any psychometric tool we do. You start to say, look, let's come up with a rubric, let's evaluate that thing, and that's what we do with the models that we're developing.
Okay, I'm going to try and fit in 2 questions here. We've got about 5 minutes left. The first is, how do you interact with, maybe we can get 1 or 2 responses, how do you interact with people who don't want to be changed, who think they are right as they are? I know it's a very simple question.
We just sent them home.
Oh, wow.
Other thoughts?
How many of you work with undergraduate college students
Yeah.
or are parents?
That's all.
Okay. So we often know that it's hard to change people who don't want to change. And I would add on hard on impossible. Impossible. I'll go with impossible. To add on to one of the fundamental tenets of coaching, you have to have a desire to change or to actually make that change happen. And it's not the coach's responsibility to make the change happen, it's the client or the student. So when you look at where does that locus of control lie, where's the ownership for the change and the transformation, the coach is the conduit. They will facilitate, they will ask the questions, they will create the container so the relationship can exist and grow, but it's not their responsibility for those outcomes. Granted, if you work in an organization or an institution, you want outcomes, you want data. So to try to match those on top of each other can often be difficult and complex.
Any other quick thoughts?
Very quick, briefly, I mean, I add on the same line. I think what I learned once in a supervision process, yes, my role as a coach is I'm responsible for the process, not for the outcome, and that's in the same sort of line. The client is responsible for the outcome. It's sometimes, if you want to help, because of the helping profession, it's sometimes difficult to deal with your own necessity of getting the client to the outcome. But if you focus, once again, it's perfectly all right if the client still is, at the end of the session, I'm where I am and I don't want to change. You don't know how that looks like. Give them some time to think about it. And sometimes the one who puts up the biggest resistance to change in the beginning is the one perhaps 3 months down the line who did the step. Because he or she was not ready. I give you an example because it lives with stories. I had at the beginning of the year in an EMBA coaching session somebody who gave me he crucified me basically in the happy smiley sheet like of how he perceived the session. We come up to the end of the program and he's a believer. He is perhaps of the whole 10 people I coached through that year, the one where I say from where he started and where he is now, he has made a tremendous change. So be a little bit like dubious. It's not the one who cries out loud, I've changed after he's seen or she's seen the light with you in 45 minutes of a session, who's the one further down the line who will do that.
Actually, most of the coaching, it's been my experience and many others, I think actually happens in between sessions or well after the session.
We're going to wrap things up there. I thank you all for coming and joining us today. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. There are a couple of questions that I didn't get to. Please feel free to come ask panelists questions just here for a second. We also appreciate your evaluations, and we appreciate your participation and your questions. I think this is wonderful, so thank you all.
And we've also
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you to you.
We've started an ILA space leadership coaching session. So if you are interested in joining that group, we can continue this discussion via the ILA space.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.